Right. So subclass 482, what is it? A lot of people call it the TSS. It's an employee nominated visa, which means we need two parties for this visa to happen. We need an employer, a company that is set up and operating in Australia or going to be soon operating in Australia. And also we need an employee or an applicant who has an occupation that's in the medium to long term list, short term list, or ROL. So depending on your occupation, we can select whether we want to apply under the medium to long term occupation stream or the short term occupation stream. Lot of people get this confused. So some people think if we get the visa for 2 years, then it's always under short term stream. That is not true. It depends on your occupation. So if your occupation is in the medium to long term list, you will always get a subclass 482 in the medium to long term stream. And if your occupation is on the short term list, you will always get a visa for short term stream. The benefits of this visa. In subclass 482, you can add your family members into the visa. But something that you should keep in mind, if you're including your family members into subclass 482 visa, all your family members and the main applicant has to be in the same location. So for example, this visa can be applied from Australia, within Australia, or from outside. But if you're outside as the main applicant, all your family has to be in that same country. Whether it's the UK or US or Sri Lanka, India, whichever the country, they all have to be in the same country at the time of application. Or the main applicant can have the visa first and then they can apply for the secondary applicants in a secondary visa. Then the secondary applicants can be anywhere. They don't have to be at the same time and place. And most of the states allow dependents of subclass 482 visa to go to Australian state schools free of charge, but you have to maintain a Medicare or a private health insurance during the period. And all visas, all applicants who are on subclass 482 are now being invited to apply for subclass 186 TRT. Until 30th of June, so until today, people who are only on the medium to long term list were eligible to apply for permanent residency. But now people who are on the short term list, occupation has on the short term list, also going to be eligible to apply for permanent residency after 2 years, which is actually really good news for most of these people who are on 482 short term occupation list. For example, cooks and other managers, restaurant managers, hotel motel managers, they did not have any pathway for permanent residency. Now their pathway is open for permanent residency just after 2 years on 482, which is really good news for most of the people, I can tell. Alright, so let's look at the different visa applications or the different parts of the subclass 482. Subclass 482 has three parts: sponsorship, nomination, and visa application. Sponsorship is the initial step. So as long as the business is registered, business has a ASIC or whatever the structure registered, and you're operating and you have some documentation to prove, we can get through with the first step. According to my experience, I think this first step is the easiest. It is called applying for a standard business sponsorship, which means it gives the business kind of a license to nominate people or to bring people from overseas or foreign people to work in their business. Once you have a sponsorship, you get it done once and it's valid for 5 years. And you can nominate as many number of people as you like within this sponsorship period. But if your business structure changes, then the business has to apply for a new sponsorship. If not, when it's expiring in 5 years, when you know that it's going to be expiring soon, you just need to renew your standard business sponsorship to keep that, so to hold that status or the license that allows you to nominate people. So very first step, normally it's done between the migration agent and the business. Applicant doesn't have to get involved, and we don't even need to tell the department at this stage which applicants you're thinking of sponsoring. You just need to get that approval, and you don't need to give the details of the nominees, because some of my corporate clients, they come to me and they get a standard business sponsorship done in hopes of finding people or finding different applicants from offshore and nominating them in the future, but they don't know who they are. So first step can be done without the nominees, just as when the business is running. The second step, which I think is the most critical and the most difficult step, is the nomination. Nomination means we are telling the department that the business is capable and business has a genuine need for our nominee. For my example today, I'll probably use a restaurant and our nominee would be a chef. So we are telling, okay, we have this restaurant, we either just opened or we've been running it. We either had someone, some other chefs, or we didn't have a chef that we need for this position, but we do need someone. We have tried to advertise this position and we've tried to find local labor to fill this position of the chef, but we couldn't. Because of that, we are nominating someone. So that is, in a nutshell, or very briefly and clearly explained, what the nomination is. We need a lot of documentation to support this nomination. We need to prove that business is actually operating, the position is genuine, what is the job description, how long is the contract, how much are we paying. So the paying also brings up an important aspect of the 482 nomination, is the TISMIT, which is the minimum amount you have to pay to an employee. As of today, so as of tomorrow, it's going to go up, and it's going to be 70,000 plus super for any occupation across subclass 482. So if we are sponsoring a chef, I can see we have a question as well from Carl. According to new amendment, TISMIT will be 70,000 for 482 nominations. That is correct. According to those who submitted their nomination on or visa granted before 1st of July, when they apply for 186 visa, is the TISMIT applicable to them, 53,000 or 70,000? So if their visa's already granted for them, it's okay for them to be on that visa for 53,000 or more. But when they're going to apply for subclass 186, the new contract will need to have 70,000. So that is the requirement. Even for people who are on 482 and they are going for a new 482 because their 482 is coming to an end, even their requirement is 70,000. So going back to my explanation, so the one of the main aspects is labor market testing and proving that this nominated place cannot be filled. And we also need to prove that whatever the salary that we are paying to the nominee would be the same salary that we would pay to any Australian. This is to ensure that we are not trying to find cheap labor from overseas to avoid paying high salaries to Australians. So department wants to make sure that this doesn't happen, and they have sort of emphasized that they are going to be taking measures to make sure that employers try not to extort labor and try to and always pay the reasonable salary to any employee that they hire, whether they're Australians or whether they're foreign employees. So to ensure that they have increased the TISMIT, which is going to be 70,000. Right, so going back to my talking about the second step is the nomination. What kind of documentation we need for the nomination? We need to prove that the business can actually afford to pay the position and the position genuinely exists in the business. So to do that, we look at the business's previous year's financials, the BAS lodgements, we ask for an organizational chart, and we also ask for documents like genuine position statement, position description, model contract signed by the employee and the employer. That contract, we normally mention that it is subject to visa grant, because if you're overseas or if you're here on a visa that has limited work rights, they can't really start a full-time position. So we always mention in the contract that it is subject to visa grant, but the case officer wants to see what kind of terms would be in this contract given that the visa is granted. So we need to have a contract and all the documents that I mentioned. And if it's a new business, then we may need additional documents. For example, so I'm using restaurant for today. If it is a restaurant and if they're doing renovations, if they're paying subcontractors, if they're buying new equipment, buying new vehicles, so we need to provide all this evidence. We need to convince the case officer and to tell the case officer that it is a new place, but look, we are doing all this, and then we normally support that case with a business plan. So we use a business plan and we show that this is the plan for the future, these are our projections, this is the kind of staff we need, this is the kind of staff we have. So that way we can easily justify this position and why we need this employee. And also we already proved that we cannot find this local labor. So then again brings in another very critical part of the nomination, which is LMT. LMT stands for labor market testing. So what is labor market testing? So as a requirement, as I mentioned earlier, we need to prove that we tried to find local labor to find an Australian chef who could fill this position, but we couldn't. How do we prove that? So department has given very clear instructions for labor market testing. We need to have 3 job advertisements live for 28 days, and we need to collect the CVs, and we need to really look at the CVs, and if these people are eligible, we need to call them for interview, and we need to see that whether we can find someone. If we can't find someone, then we give a report, which is called the LMT report, to say, okay, we advertised in 3 mediums. So the 3 mediums, one of the mandatory mediums has to be the Australian workforce website. So in that website, again, we have to advertise for 28 days. So in the report, we normally mention, okay, we received 5 CVs, none of them were available for an interview, or they could be from other countries, they probably didn't have work rights, or they didn't have the necessary skills that we've been looking for. So that is the part of, that is a very critical part of nomination, labor market testing. So once that's done, we have the report, and then we, even through the labor market testing, we can go and see other job advertisements that were out there to figure out what is the salary that, you know, this position deserves. Because not all chefs get the same salary. Some chefs may not have the experience. Some chefs could have 10 years experience behind them, and they could have other references and other work experience that that this business critically is looking for. So in that case, they might decide to offer them little extra salary. So we need to provide all this information to the case officer and prove that we have a genuine case and we have a genuine need for this position, and this person who is our nominee is going to be the best person for this occupation. So that is a part of nomination, and once we have all that, we can lodge the nomination application. The last part, or the third part, is the visa application. So it's all to do with the visa applicant. Sponsorship, nomination and visa can all lodged on the same day. So sometimes if the nominee's visa is expiring soon, or for some other reason, if we do need to lodge it at the same time, what we do, we lodge the sponsorship, wait for it to be received, then we lodge the nomination, and then wait for it to be received, and we lodge the visa on the same day. We don't really recommend that. What we normally do in a normal scenario, if we don't have a time issue, we normally wait, lodge the sponsorship and nomination, wait for the grant, then only we lodge the visa application. Right. So the visa application. What does the visa applicant need for a subclass 482? So there's a lot of information out there. Some is accurate, some is not. A lot of people think that there is an age limit for subclass 482. I just want to say that from the applicant side, there is no age limit. You can apply for subclass 482 even though you're 50, 60. It doesn't matter, as long as you can secure this employment. But in order for you to get permanent residency through subclass 482 in the general stream, which is through subclass 186 TRT, you need to be under 45 right now. It may change in the future, but the requirement right now is 45. So, what requirements does an applicant need to be eligible for subclass 482? The main applicant. So all this primary criteria has to be filled by the main applicant. Secondary applicants, which are partner and children, doesn't have to meet the primary criteria. As long as they are members of the family unit, they can pass health and character. That's all they look at. So I'm not going to talk too much about the secondary applicants, but all this requirement that I'm explaining to you now would be for the main applicant. Number 1, main applicant's English. So depending on which stream you apply, so I explained to you earlier, it depends on your occupation. So if an applicant has an occupation on the medium to long term list, they need different English than if they have their occupation on the short term list. So if someone has an occupation on the short term list, they go under the short term stream. Still same subclass 482 visa, but short term stream. So what they need, 5 in each band and 5 overall and 4.5 in each band for IELTS. 36 overall in PT and 30 in each band. That's if your occupation is on the short term list. If your occupation is on the medium to long term list, you need to have 5 in each band. Right, so that is the English requirement. There are some exceptions for this English requirements. If you studied in an English speaking country for 2 years at least, or to complete a certificate, you can be exempted from English. Or if you hold a passport of certain countries, there are 6 countries, you are exempted from this English requirement. Other than that, all applicants must sit for an English test, and we normally ask for the results before we go for the nomination, because once we lodge the nomination and we can't then we can't change. If the applicant doesn't get English, all that money the sponsor spent on nomination would be gone to waste, and we won't be able to lodge the visa. So that's the English requirement. And as I said earlier, there is no age requirement. Applicant needs to have a qualification or work experience to cover that qualification. Normally for a bachelor's degree, you need 5 years work experience to cover for that. Normally for a diploma or certificate, you need 3 years experience to cover for that. So the applicant either needs to have a qualification or the work experience to cover for that, plus 2 years work experience. So I'll just give you an example. If you're a chef, you have a qualification which is a diploma. So for subclass 482, chef needs to have a level 2 qualification, which is a diploma. And all the occupations, if you tell me the occupation, then I can tell you, okay, this is the skill level. So for all the accountants and engineers and IT people, they need to have a skill level 1, which is a bachelor's degree. And for most of the trades, they need to have a certificate 3 level. And for some occupations like chef, they need to have skill level 2, which is a diploma. So whichever the skill level, you need to have a qualification plus 2 years work experience. So this 2 years work experience has to be equivalent to full time. It doesn't have to be full time work experience. If it's part time, then we need 4 years. So that's what it means when I say equivalent to 2 years full time work experience. This work experience doesn't have to be in Australia. It can be anywhere in the world. And also very importantly, this work experience of the nominee doesn't have to be with the same employer who nominates them for 482. So this work experience can be anywhere in the world with any employer. But you need to be able to prove with documentation that you actually do have this work experience. So what documentation we are talking about? So it could be pay slips, it could be contracts, reference letters, money coming into your bank, superannuation, EPF, ETF. So there are various kind of information or the documentation we can produce to prove that you have the 2 years work experience. So age, I talked about, English, then the skill. So they are the main things we look at when we look at an applicant for subclass 482 visa. As long as applicant have all this, and if applicant wants to bring the family can also fulfill the criteria of health and character. From the applicant side, it's all good to go. There is one other thing that I would like to mention, but this doesn't apply to all applicants. For some occupations, I think about 16 occupations, you need to have a skill assessment. So some of the trades, for example, cooks, bakers, pastry chefs, motor mechanics, the list goes on. There's about 16 occupations. You need to have a skill assessment if you're from a certain country. Like if you're from India, the Philippines, Nepalese, there are some other countries in there as well. You must have a skill assessment. Again, this is case by case, so I'm not going to be talking about it for too much, because it can easily confuse people and think that every skill or every occupation needs a skill assessment. That is not true. But some occupations, for some people holding some passports, they need skill assessment. There's still exempt criteria for this skill assessment, given that this person studied in Australia, they did their training and work experience in Australia. This requirement can be waived, which means they don't need skill assessment. There is another important aspect of 482 visa that we need to look at. Again, people can get confused here. There are something called caveats. So some occupations, Department of Home Affairs says if you're applying for a 482 for certain occupation, you need to meet these caveats, otherwise you're not going to be eligible. So I'm just going to go to our example of chef. Chef has two caveats. Number one, it can't be in a mass production factory. So for example, if there is a factory that's making mass products of chicken nuggets or something, and they say, okay, I need a chef to do this production. It doesn't work like that. Chef has to be in a dine-in restaurant. And the second caveat is it cannot be a limited service restaurant. It has to be a full service, full menu restaurant. Limited service restaurants are like takeaways where you don't really need a chef skill. So again, it comes to, you need to look at for each occupation, is there a caveat? Is there a skills assessment requirement? So these are the things that can make the subclass 482 process more complicated. As long as you make sure that the applicant's qualified, the position is needed, the business is genuinely and legally operating in Australia, all the caveats are met. If there are caveats, if there is a skills assessment requirement, that is met. If English requirement is met, and the applicant's work experience and the qualification requirements are met, an applicant doesn't have any bad visa history or major health concerns, the reason for refusal for 482 can be minimal. So what we do normally when we talk to an employer or when we talk to an employee, we make sure all these boxes are ticked before we go ahead with the visa. And also we make sure that when we apply for a 482 visa, again, very important information, we make sure that it's a complete application. Because for us to lodge a nomination, applicant doesn't even need to have skills assessment or English. But we don't normally go ahead with the nomination unless we have all the background information, all the mandatory requirements are fulfilled. Because these days, subclass 482s are getting processed in less than 1 month. Most of our clients in the last 2 to 3 months have had their nomination and visas granted, sometimes in 10 days, 15 days. So if we don't submit a complete application, this can go really bad. Because by the time the case officer opens the file, we don't have all the necessary information in there. They can come to us and ask for this information, or they can make a decision based on the information they have at hand. So it's very important that we submit a complete application, especially for a visa that has a very short processing period. And I think this processing period is going to be even shorter in the future, because that's what the new government's talking about as well, trying to make the visa application process quicker so the application programs are more attractive to people. Right, so I hope you guys have a understanding about the subclass 482. As I said, there's 3 steps: sponsorship, nomination, and visa application. I didn't really talk about fees too much because again it's very much so case by case, and fees are changing, and they're talking about big changes to SAF levy. So what I have given you is the basic information that you need to get your subclass 482 visa started. Let's see, I think I've got time for last question. I heard LMT might not be required after 1st July. Are you expecting this on the 1st July? Yeah, how long do I wait to get PR on 482? Mars Australia, thank you for 2 questions. I think they're very important questions. Yes, they are I don't think the LMT requirement will be gone completely. But I have a feeling that there'll be changes coming to the way that they conduct LMT, because they believe that it's not really effective. But LMT going doesn't mean that the requirement will still be there. The purpose of LMT is to make sure that we treat Australians the same way that we would treat our nominees or the foreign employees. I think there will be some kind of measure that's put into place to replace LMT, even if it goes. So at the end, I think the requirement would still be the same. And how long do you have to wait in 482 to get permanent residency? 2 years. So it used to be 2 years, then it went back to 3 years. Now it's gone back to 2 years for people who are on the medium to long term list as well as short term list. Really good news. I think the best news out so far. I've got Carl asking, hi Ashani, what means when you apply for 186? Employee needs to provide new contract which meets 70k. Yes, that's correct. In that situation, they don't consider 53k or 70k, but at the time of 186 apply, it should be 70k Tismit. That is correct, Carl. Yeah, that is our understanding as well. But if you want me to look into it further, send us an email, admin@cirrus.com.au. I'll look into your case separately and give you advice. I've got Sonam, this would be the last question I guess, asking, can bridging visa C invite siblings? It depends how you got the bridging visa C, Sonam. So if you have applied for a permanent visa and waiting, you're still on BVC, I think yes, but I need to look at, I think rather than your current visa, whether it's A, B or C, I need to look at your visa history. Then I can say, because if you are inviting siblings, I guess they are coming here on visitor visa, what they look at is their genuine intention to return. So with that, what they look at is the visa history of anyone who's related to them in Australia. So they will look into your visa history. I think it's more important your history than what visa you're currently on. But still, there is nothing stopping you from inviting your relatives if you're on bridging visa C. No restrictions or anything. Alright guys, thank you so much for listening in. I think this is a start of a very important and interesting series. Employee nominated visa, subclass 482, 186, 407, 494. There's a lot of information out there, so I am here to clear your doubts and give you the right information so you know which visa is best for you and you can start the process. Thank you so much for listening in, and I will see you next week.